Thank you. Good eye.
Okay, that's the formatted questions on the exam. Anything on content you want to ask about or elaborate? Anybody want to comment on any differences that you may have seen from any of your other courses or others' experience, either in cities that you've known about more? That would be always interesting to see and discuss. One of you had the course, say, with Mark Hansen. Was that? No, someone had the course of Mark Hansen, or any other urban course, or any other social theory course. I mean, all your public policy courses. It's your, and of course, any comparisons with China. I'll tell the others, even if we don't have a distinguished visitor, as we fortunately do, in my other classes, I've for ever since Tiananmen Square, I have tried to have a teaching assistant, and then often would say, how would what I say be different in China? And then we discuss from that, and that's how I have learned a lot from those kinds of Chinese participants. Plus, we have had often, as I said, maybe 90 distinguished visitors. Most of them have come to class, even if they are, a guy was simultaneously dean of the School of Communism and dean of the School of Philosophy of Renmin University's top Asian university. And he was very interested in sort of American versions of Marx's background, and got transformed and later worked by Daniel Bell, by Marty Lipset, by Merton, etc. So forth. Let me pause for 1 or 2 more minutes if anybody has a question or comparison. The comparisons with China and France is, again, we're very fortunate to have an actual, not just Frenchman, but he's a high-level working in his job downtown with the French consulate. So he's in touch with a lot of high-level people who come around the U.S. Any quick comments on, say, your experiences working downtown with the consulate that would be useful for others in the course?
Regarding crossing what we've seen in the course?
Any things that, or any connections with your other courses, and then how they do or don't connect or whatever?
Well, definitely the presence of artists and art inside of different.
Could we pull that? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Chair, thank you for joining us. Thank you much. You want to introduce yourself to the others?
I'm in the first semester, and I'm a student in computational social science program. This is my first semester.
Okay. We're just reviewing related and comparing activities.
The importance of artists and their work in both the life of a city, whether it's Chicago, and the passage of artists from different countries through Chicago and through the Midwest happens a lot, and they bring different ideas. And the difference between local actors here and
a leading question. What proportion of the artists or arts-related people that you've seen in Chicago or in France would you describe as loosely or tightly or not at all bohemian?
I would say like half, because it's really like different between both of them. Like there's the really bohemian artists that we've seen, like those that were described in class.
Could you move a little bit if you're shouting in the hall, please? Thank you. Okay.
But then there's also those that adhere a lot more to like conventions, and also depending on where they went to university or what they're working on, it also depends on how they act. Like there was this very famous French author that came, and he did like the very traditional French school and education system, and he's not at all bohemian like other artists.
But did you say half, or I didn't maybe?
I haven't seen a lot of them, to be honest, and those that come to Chicago aren't exactly the classic artists from France, because they have a project with the US, so it's all related to the region, so it also takes, I don't know, it's not the classic artist.
No, but in what they present, when you say it's classic, I mean if they do not mention in the presentation anything to do with bohemian themes, that's a legitimate answer.
Yeah, most of them don't.
Okay, no, but that's an important point, which why is this important? Because most of the literature about artists and their relationship to society, the lyrics of rap, the lyrics of rock, the lyrics of in the tradition say the English challenging of society in the 1950s and 60s, continuing say with the Jamaican origins of rap, and then continuing today all the more with the Chicago Black Power kinds of activities. These generally have an anti-establishment kind of lyric, and that was shared in the 19th century origins of the artist's culture, stressed by Balzac, Baudelaire, and others, and up through Jean-Paul Sartre. When Jean-Paul Sartre came to Chicago, he looked at a club which included business leaders who were businessmen, and I'm leading up to the title of Sartre was one of his most famous titles. What was it? It was that title. It's something like vomit, something like that.
Nausea?
Sorry?
Nausea?
Nausea, there we go. La nausea, yeah. So nausea was what he felt in looking at the business leaders in Chicago, etc. Okay. So his girlfriend at the time was of course writing, was building the field work and the source for a very infamous book called The Second Sex. Okay. The connections between, so just one more connection. This was the period of, even before de Gaulle, there was a professor of French visitor here at the University of Chicago for a semester. And again, I can't immediately give you his name. I'm bad on names and dates and specifics, as you've seen. But he was, as he would go from Hyde Park to the downtown, there was regularly there a neon sign, which would say on and off, on and off, a meal a minute, a meal a minute, a meal a minute. Okay, this was before you had the explosion of fast food, but the meal a minute was taken back to France and was part of the foundation of de Gaulle of directly attacking American culture as everything that France should not do. And so having a neon sign, a meal a minute it's I won't say it's not necessarily bohemian, but at least it's critical in these examples I'm giving you, which connect in turn with the 19th century bohemian culture from France, and the way it then continued in Greenwich Village in New York, and then in Wicker Park in Chicago. And so their overall style has been, I would say, overgeneralized. If you try then to say, how much has this now spread to Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Waco, Texas? How much do those places where artists are also present, also bohemian? And usually, I mean, that is why is, and I'm beginning to I don't want to talk too much, but elaborating at least the beginnings. Why might be any research that we've read about why our bohemianism might be more salient or less salient in different kinds of neighborhoods or cities in the U.S. or elsewhere? Any hypotheses that any of you might suggest from thinking about these issues? The background for this was the cases of Balzac and Baudelaire. Lots of individual cases by historians, which would then say, yes, this is now spreading, and here's one case of one artist or one art's neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and say, look, it's spreading. Richard Florida then, in his book, his most famous book was the Rise of the Creative Class, stressed bohemianism as an index, but how did he measure it in his index? Anybody think I mentioned this before? Yeah.
Wasn't it the number of like arts jobs in the city?
Exactly. Number of arts related jobs. Okay, what's the problem with doing that, given what we're talking about here? Yeah.
A lot of people engaged in the arts that aren't formally in their jobs, and so the index would not capture that.
That's one which is very important, that many artists cannot or choose to not or cannot find a job which will pay enough to support them to live on. Anybody remember, I didn't talk about it much, but there's this book on the reading list called Richard Lloyd's Neo-Bohemia, which is a case study of Wicker Park, but then that was the MA and then the PhD. Then he spent a couple of years and he generalized it substantially more, arguing with Florida and with other people. And he ended taking, Lloyd took a quite strong theoretical position that artists and creators and innovators and people who are doing new things and the Florida kind of creative class must destroy what's around you in order that you can be creative yourself afterward. It's a sort of deterministic reading of a famous book on this topic. You all should know about. I think it's on the, if it's not on the reading, I'm mentioning it right here. Joseph Schumpeter's book called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And what was his argument? I mean, if you don't, even if you've never seen the book, what's the relationship between those three concepts in Schumpeter's book? Capitalism, socialism, and democracy. So it's a leading question. It's a hard question because there's a lot of literature arguing about the relationships among these. So so let's say the John Locke view or the probably Alexander Hamilton view would be, if you have more private activities and more factions and diverse kinds of activities, that should be consistent with competition and with more democracy. That's one argument. The other, and then the strong version of that could be socialism and Marx cannot be democratic because it is imposing a theoretical perspective, and if you do that, then that doesn't leave open the potential for democratic debate. I mean, that's an ideological argument against that relationship. The socialist argument, Professor Chen, what would you say is, do you hear about the relationship? Is there a theoretical or an ideological or any relationship between democracy, socialism, and capital? Because you have capitalism and socialism inside China, where and how is there, and where is there democracy in China, and where might these three be discussed?
I think it's harmony. They can stay together, no matter you are capitalist or socialism. Yeah. Harmony.
Well, okay, but if we have three things: capitalism, socialism, and democracy. So if we have A, B, C, is A equal, or encouraging B, or is it plus, minus, or zero? These are three hypotheses. 1, 2, 3.
I think socialism is a key, is the main part.
Yes.
Yeah, key part.
That's clear.
Yeah, and capitalism, like Hong Kong or the other specific zone is capitalism. They can continue this. Yeah. They are allowed. They are allowed it. Yeah. And the democracy, we think we all have the democracy.
All right, I missed your last sentence.
You mean the democracy?
Can what?
Democracy?
Yes. What and why are they positive or negative or zero? That is, let me make explicit. They're two different things. You're talking more about counting how much democracy or how much capitalism or how much socialism is there in China. That, in a sense, that's descriptive measurement. That's the first. Yes, that's good to ask and good to describe in a paper or in discussing. It's good to say, we're high on socialism in China, but in the last 20, 30 years, there is a good chunk of the economy of China which is private and which is explicitly discussed as capitalist, and it may be Chinese citizens inside China starting a coffee shop, starting a restaurant, starting making dumplings and selling those. That is a capitalist activity, which is when I was in Yugoslavia. This was was soon after Tito, when it was strong socialism, And so I asked the people in Yugoslavia, I mean, people are doing some things. What part of the economy is socialist, and how do you define socialist or capitalist? And what they told me, I'll ask you, what would people say in China? Because in Yugoslavia they said, if you have 4 workers under you, that is socialist. If you have 5, you are capitalist.
I want to quote a famous saying that maybe we talk more about marketing. Like Deng Xiaoping said, no matter black cat or white cat, the cat who can catch the mouse is good, like that. So, like capitalism is just a marketing or a tool, a method to realize the Chinese dream, to make us live better. So this is just a method or tool. Yeah.
Okay, and so in that
We
this is,
mention more about the marketing, not the capitalism. Yeah, like that.
okay, so
Yeah.
I mean that in a sense that's a kind of answer. Go ahead.
Maybe I can add one more example.
Sure, go ahead.
It's Jack Ma's example.
So
That was
you said that.
Jack Ma is famous for Alibaba in China.
China Mao
Jack Ma.
or Jack Ma?
Yeah. He is
Okay.
an entrepreneur in China. He's very famous maybe
Yes.
5 years ago.
Okay, yes.
And he wants to initiate a financial reform in China, which in a sense challenges the policies of the central party. And he is immediately pressed down. And many people thought that the Jack Ma's example is there's a voice. People want to participate in the agenda of politics because they are wealthy and they are powerful. So I think this is example that supports the argument that capitalism leads to democracy because they have more economic power to fall back on, and therefore they want to participate in the politics. But in my undergrad course, I took a course with Vivek Shimber at NYU, and his course title is exactly Capitalism and Democracy. And his argument,
Okay, excellent.
and his argument is very socialist ideology oriented. And his argument is basically because in the capitalism, because there is an increased disparity between the economic power between different people.
Yep, the rich and the poor.
Yeah. So that's against my argument that capitalism leads to democracy. So he thinks that socialism leads to democracy.
If we add this related concept of human rights, which the Westerners have, in say from 1945 onward with the United Nations, they've often said to the Chinese, you cannot have, you're not being internationally democratic if you don't respect more human rights of individuals. And the classic Chinese answer has been, if people are so poor as they are, the poorest people in America, if you don't help them first financially, you are not being democratic or responsive, and therefore the first ground step means that this is it's a global, well-known kind of argument, and you're sort of raising that and connecting these, and we're using China as a case, but it's not uniquely Chinese. I mean, these you can see the same thing, and these are the same arguments have been made by African American leaders and critics, and they're on records in the arts. Okay. Did you read anything like the Schumpeter book or?
Actually, my undergrad course, my professor critiqued the book by Capitalism and Freedom from
Milton Friedman?
Yeah, Friedman.
Yeah.
And he exactly critiqued his basic idea. That's the starting point. I think in that book, I think Friedman supports that capitalism leads to democracy.
Yes, Friedman, who was here, of course, was a classic so-called Chicago boys were his students, and they went to Chile, and they thought of capitalism first, and that will, because they would say explicitly, if we have more economic freedom and competition, that will generate democracy. And in that sense, it's a materialist interpretation, which is in that sense, that term of historical materialism came not from Marx, but from Engels. but it's widely used to refer to Marxism as part of historical materialism. But I'm using Milton Friedman, and it's not uniquely Marxist. So Milton Friedman said the same. Many of the business magazines in the U.S. will have the same sort of view, that if there's money there, then that's about the economy, or that will explain part of why people will say in politics in terms of their interests or their whatever. The I'm mentioning the Friedman. These are good names to bring in because they're the big visible kinds of names associated with these kinds of arguments, which then. What the Schumpeter did, Schumpeter was an Austrian and German, then he was a professor at Harvard for a number of years, and he tried to distill this argument by saying there are many arguments, and he tried to go over and to show that there are many people who say why it's positive, why it's negative, and why it's zero. And his basic conclusion, to let the cat out of the bag, was zero. That is, democracy can be associated with socialism, and democracy can be associated with capitalism, but there is no deterministic, strong kind of always a relationship. But he also, another big idea of Schumpeter, also in the same book, is that in order for capitalism or modernity, innovation, and so forth, implies destruction of the old. In that sense, that's a bohemian kind of view, and this is what Richard Florida was stressing, that if, and artists are strong examples, but they're not only artists. There can be, anybody who has a new kind of liquor or car or pair of shoes. You may try to destroy the old of saying, why my brand of shoes or anything else is better than the old. So in that sense, and Baudelaire, of course, a classic both theorist of, he wrote explicitly about modernity, not just capitalism, but modernity. But he made an interesting argument, which I'll now ask, again, a leading question. How does Baudelaire, who was two questions about Baudelaire. Who really studied Baudelaire that we've talked about in the class, and where and why is that connection valuable? And then second, what was the relationship between, say, style of clothes and dress and choosing new clothes, as I mentioned, shoes? How do these relate to high status versus low status persons? So I'm asking two bigger theoretical questions, which have been widely discussed, including these sources that I'm mentioning, and many others you may well have read, or even if you haven't read them, you've heard people arguing, talking about them emotionally and powerfully today in your other classes. Such as you're bringing in the one from NYU is perfect. There are many classes in America and France and Italy that Argentina would say the same kind of thing. That the left is necessary to be socialist and to have democracy, and whereas the others would say that The right would say the opposite. Okay. So I'm back with my questions. Anybody have either a possible answer or a guess on what I suggested about these two questions? Talk to me. Okay, first question was, who used Baudelaire that we've talked about several times and maybe you have mentioned and you may have read and remember in this course? And what was a big concept that came in French? Walter Benjamin, excellent, and the big concept? Yeah. Flaneur, F-L-A-N-E-U-R, Le Flaneur. Just put it on the board. So. And what's a flaneur? Why? How does it relate to the course?
Flaneur, I mean, the direct translation is like the stroller. So it's someone who, I think the exact opposite would be like the New York style, I guess, of people walking around, destination focused, heading someplace. The flaneur instead strolls, looks at things, looks at people, how people use the space.
Excellent, perfect. Okay, that's great. So the Benjamin then would link with and would think of some of the Impressionist paintings of having someone with a black top hat and maybe a beautiful lady, maybe a ballerina on his arm, and they might stop and look in the shops and look at the windows there. I'll add it's a little it's a topic of a guy who did I think an MA and maybe also a PhD. Why is Chicago I had a friend who was a professor of sociology at the University of Texas, Austin. When he was growing up in Texas, he used to go with his family and then alone when he got to be a teenager, he would come to Chicago every single Christmas. Why? They wanted to go to what was then called Marshall Fields, and it's now called Macy's, like Gimbel's, whatever, if you're from New York. Big department store, middle of downtown, and it had beautifully elaborately done window dressing, models, sleighs, Santa Claus, things of this sort. The editor of the national newspaper about window dressing was a guy who also, he was writing more serious articles about window dressing, but he also then was writing a novel. And so he was the leading national expert on window dressing and arts and aesthetics in that sense. My names are great today. I'm leaving out the bottom line names. What's the young lady from Kansas? The novel named in her name. The author, who was the window dressing expert, has a park named for him right in the middle of Lincoln Park today, and right at the corner is the Tin Man. Okay, the Tin Man was one of the heroes, along with the heroine.
Are you talking about the Wizard of Oz?
The Wizard of Oz.
Oh, Dorothy?
Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Okay, when this was published around 1912, something like that, it was instantly a huge successful novel. And it was very, very popular. It was translated into Russian, into many foreign languages around the world. And it showed the American dream for some people. And so after he published The Wizard of Oz, he stopped doing the window dressing for Marshall Fields. but he had set a high standard, and that continues in discussing shops and shopkeeping and the flaneur and aesthetics. And so I'm pointing to Dan's, that is, I never paid much attention to this until I started working on it. After, as I said, I didn't study these for cities. I didn't study the arts at all when I was working on cities. I'd done some music, some arts things. I went to art school for them myself, but I never connected that to the urban part until Peter Octoberg came here, and then we discovered that Putnam is partly wrong in that organizations are not all going down. We're not always having this kind of decline of this was the Tocquevillian theory as to why we need legitimate democracy. Rather, the arts are an exception. The arts were taking off. And then the question is, where and how do these things connect to each other? And so we're getting some examples from a New York course, from China, from France. Just want to sort of a related, here's a related, quasi-descriptive question of that in terms of the how lively today is Baudelaire in the surveys of the French, the French national population, I'm not sure about the Chinese, but the Indians in India population, they were on the top of my head. And I think in, maybe it was Poland, it was a French study I saw. The French study of the French, of Brazilians, of Indian, and I think Brazil, India, France, and Poland, and which ones were most in favor or against capitalism. Which ones were most critical of capitalism? The French. French citizens in capitalist? Okay. Capitalist, question mark. France. The French citizens are strongly anti-capitalist. And so an example of how, what kind of policy might fit with that. If you're president of France, or you're a national, or you're a member of a mayor or a national assembly, how might you consider a policy that might connect the arts, democracy, and let's say French pride? Okay, one American dream symbol is, we could say, the iPhone. The iPhone, when it first came in, there was also, I will mention, there was a visiting professor at the University of Chicago came to the Department of Anthropology, and his name, let's put it on board because he's a famous name, Bruno Latour. I think he was sort of the provost or the lead faculty selection person at the Sciences Po, the School of Political Science and Social Science. It's a private university. It has some government support now, but it was founded proudly as a private. It was not part of the Sorbonne, not part of the official Ministry of Education. It was a private university, and it trained many of the staff in I'd say the middle level, higher middle level people. It wasn't the very top. If you wanted to be a high level political leader or staff person, you'd go to Sciences Po, and then after that you'd go to the ENA, the École Nationale d'Administration, afterward. But that really has been abolished in the last, it was just 2 or 3 years ago. This was a suggestion I mentioned of Michel Crozier wanting that. Okay, so the why is this important? Bruno Latour was visiting here in anthropology, and there were a number of sociologists there as well. We have a couple of overlapping appointments. And he gave a public lecture to summarize what he was bringing, and he said he has a chair. He's a professor at the Gabriel Tard Professorship at the Sciences Po University. Okay, Gabriel Tard, I happen to have done a book on one of my first books, which I did as part of my PhD. But basically, Tard was a critic of Durkheim. They were the two leading sociologists around 1880 to 1900, and they debated with each other. Durkheim would talk about social facts and the society imposes these values on you and so forth. Whereas Tard's view was the opposite. Individualism is something that should be enhanced, and so then when they had debates, and they got into more active debates over the Dreyfus affair was going on, and many of the intellectuals were criticizing the military for being anti-Semitic and so forth. So these kinds of debates were going on. And Durkheim and Tard both basically were in favor of tolerance, and they really ended up saying many of the same kinds of things. Both moralistically, if you will, ethically, as well as analytically. But Bruno Latour is a great sense of his name. If you if you do every look at a wine menu, Latour is a very big name in Burgundy wines, maybe the biggest, and that's his family. So he comes from a traditional French wine growing family, and so Bruno Latour, and he knows about the classic ethnographic style, which most people in this department here, Clifford Geertz, virtually all of them really were against anything to do with machines and quantification and things that's like computers. Sociologists have two kinds of folks. Some are more qualitative, others are more quantitative, and they may argue with each other, especially among the PhD students. But the interesting bottom line of Bruno Latour, when he made his speech, he said the bigger point about globalization is anthropology has lost its field site. You cannot go to tribes and assume that they are isolated, that they're not interpenetrated from the rest of the world, and that these are separate domains of separate tribes. Instead, there's an interpenetration of television and cell phones. And his one-line summary was, you anthropologists should learn to study clicks on screens. And the anthropologists, you could almost see them falling onto the floor. Yeah, I was in the audience, and he said, there's only one good book on my, and so he was illustrating themes from Gabriel Tard, and he had a handout of quotations from Gabriel Tard. But he didn't know me, he didn't know that I was there in the audience. But the organizer then said, do you realize that the editor or the author of this book, and Gabriel Tard is Terry Clark, who's here. And Bruno Latour then came over to me, and he bowed like this, very graciously, at the same time that he had said this thing about clicks. So you can see and then the other amusing thing was that he was then interested in doing a study of cell phones, and we did a study together of cell phones in about 8 countries around the world, where and how they were, because this is just the beginning of cell phones, of getting more so-called powerful. And so this then came back to the French national government, and the French government said, well, here, how can we maintain French wine, aesthetics, art, and yet confront these cell phones? And so what did they do? They imposed a tax. If you want to buy a cell phone, I'm not sure how much it is now, but at the beginning it was something like, $100, $200. It was very expensive. You had to pay a high tax if you want to buy a cell phone in France. But the money was then put aside and given to people like the consulate, or I would say, let's say, the ministry, not literally, but the Ministry of Cultural Affairs then had the money which was used for French language films, which were directly subsidized with the monies which came from the sale of the cell phones. Okay, so these, I'm pointing to these as scenes, policies, aesthetics, bohemia, and the national pride, which goes back to the eras. I was a student basically in the era of Charles de Gaulle, and so de Gaulle took this anti-Americanism and having French nuclear weapons. This is now it was the French. Today it's Iran, but Iran and nuclear weapons were a hot issue because the French were really the first country outside the U.S. to have nuclear weapons. And so de Gaulle was very interested himself in technology. In the 1930s, he was studying. So he said the French army has got to have more tanks. These Germans can invade us with tanks unless we don't have a way of protecting ourselves. And nobody paid attention to de Gaulle. So the technology in that sense, I mentioned the beginning, going back to the beginning of Francis the First, in roughly, what was it, 1400, something like that, years ago, created the French Academy, the Académie Française, to protect the French language. And in that sense of literally protecting the French language, de Gaulle decreed, you may not use any English language in French government documents. Everything had to have a French translation, language translation of everything. So if you folks are from computers, for people who are airline pilots, all that stuff is in English. So to have that has created a lot of conflict and debate about these kinds of issues. This is not just France. There is a party in the European Union when they have the European Congress elections, and it's called something like the Anti-English Party. That is, they want to have other languages be each used instead of just using English for everything. So in that sense, it's a political issue. Continuing in the ways that the arts can be engaged along with the technology, and this overlaps with when I was a student. That the idea that a proper French meal is a long family time together. Same thing eating pasta in Italy. And when fast food really came to Rome and to Paris, they created an association of slow food movement in Paris and in Rome. And then they also had a branch inside the U.S. to try to fight against fast food, to try to have people eating more slowly and appreciating the meal as a celebration and strengthen the family or whatever. So in these ways, illustrating the Chicago theory of group theory has also been presented as an alternative to class conflict. So instead of saying the history of the world from Marx or Lenin is class conflict, the group theory would say, no, it's groups. And one guy at the University of Chicago, looking out the window, would see ethnic groups. The Poles were fighting with the Italians, were fighting with the Germans, were fighting with the blacks, and so forth. And so in Chicago and in America more generally, so one of the famous German book on this, is why is there no socialism in America? The short answer is immigrants. We have culturally distinct, nationally represented immigrants, and they therefore are separated, or compete or fight in ways which are consistent with factions, as Hamilton talked about it. So the factions could be groups, but he didn't use the term class. Okay. I'm just playing around the ways that we have ideological and political and organizational pieces, and most of the literature will talk about these in terms of competition or conflict or democracy or socialism. What I'm doing is add the content of what was in the debates, which would say, why is the aesthetic so bad in the persons of Jean-Paul Sartre when he saw the businessman on the wall, or saw you're a French expert. If you find the name of the man who was the father of I think he invented the term franglais. That is, if you mix English and French together, we don't want any franglais in French. We want pure French. And so that was outlawed. What these do, of course, is politicize and mobilize potentially with the emotions of people who hate or who love something. They try to connect what people love or hate in ways that will have more political or policy advantage, and this happens all around the world, from the ancient Romans who would have Christian slaves who would be fought by lions and tigers and so forth. So the use of the arts in a political context and has become much more subtle now, but it's the patterns are there. Okay. So I'm making a point. I mean, my point here about is that we need the arts to be part and subtly made sense of if you're in computer science or political science or sociology or economics. You need all of these things, and when I'm saying this, the social scientists who did this first were the economists and the historians. The anthropologists and the sociologists are the last, and the political scientists just haven't done it. Okay. So the economists did this most explicitly with their concept. So I'll put on the board as well a couple of big things. Amenities. What is an amenity?
Sensitive.
Sorry?
Sensitive.
Something what?
Sensitive.
I can't hear you. Clear, just clear and specific.
Fancy.
Fancy? You mean sort of no, but that would be luxury. So amenity is not, it may be a luxury, but it's, we talked about that as luxury. Luxury could be analyzed as, for fancy wine as expensive. That is that the economic definition is you like things that are expensive, simply put. Amenity could be clean air, or good or safety in the streets, low crime. These are amenities. They're not provided by what? They're provided by
They're not provided by markets.
Exactly. The definition of an amenity is a non-market good or service. Non-market. You cannot buy it. It's the opposite of a luxury. And so the theory of Veblen or Bourdieu, which is you show your money by buying luxuries. a house or a car or wine or clothes and dress and so forth. And so I passed that over briefly by Baudelaire, one of the fathers of Bohemia. He showed that the poorest women in the streets of Paris who were prostitutes, they could be very elegantly dressed, and they would wear the most faddish new styles, even though they were low in status. But they were partially driving the fashion style in ways that was the opposite of what you would have imagined if you were following Veblen or Bourdieu. And instead of conspicuous consumption, if it were just showing your money, in a sense, the poor women in Paris were the opposite in that sense. So that is, what I'm giving you here is a critique of Bourdieu's or in Veblen's simplistic theory of conspicuous consumption. Does not explain consumption all that well. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Clearly it does exist. It's important in China. It's important. People often sort of Warner's classifications of types of social classes used to be discussed in Warner's split. There used to be 6 classes defined, and why and how is it different from Marx and the generally European continental theory. The European traditional theory of classes was that the classes were based on what was Marx's definition of a class. What made you a class? What are the components? What's the difference between the proletarians and the capitalists? Okay, Marx's definition was access and ownership of the means of production. So the capitalists own the tools, they own the buildings, they own the factories, and they have access to those physical commodities in that sense. And the definition of the proletarian was they did not own the means of production in the same way that peasants could vary, but many peasants were not the landowners. However, a little footnote. Adam Smith, how many classes did Adam Smith write about? The rich and the poor, the capitalists and the proletarians. That would be 2. That's the Marxist answer. Adam Smith and Malthus, before Marx, both wrote about 3 classes, and they were the capitalists, the farmers, the capitalists, the workers, and the farmers. And that is that land, access to land, and the ownership of land, in conjunction with farming and landing, was a 3rd class. And Marx, as a student of Hegel, did not like the idea of having 3 classes. If you want to have mobilization of emotion and of dialectical conflict, you want to have 2. 3 is starting to get to be pluralistic. Okay, so the famous 1930 discovered in Moscow, it was made over a small revolution when the essays are called the Essays of the Young Marx. When he was struggling to get away from Hegel, he said he really hated the English countryside because the English poets, the English countryside, the gardener being in the garden, these kinds of imagery were terrible because they undermined your class membership as a proletarian. So if you're a peasant with no land, you should be not a farmer, you should be a proletarian. Okay, so that's, I'm connecting these history of theory ideas of the change of class. I've tried to, and I would say many people, not all, but I try to stay with the, Max Weber did the same thing. Marx and Weber used the same definition of what is class conflict. A German later, after World War II, was Ralph Dahrendorf, and his new definition of class was any conflict, any source of conflict that groups are fighting or disagreeing over. And so, I'm picking up on I studied at Frankfurt with Adorno and Horkheimer, as did Mosh Postone, who was very active teaching in the college here. And he's a professor in history, but also in the college. He has a book about Marxism and socialism and so forth. And he says he is a Frankfurt sociologist. But one of the examples he cites is conflict, and class conflict today is illustrated by smokers versus non-smokers. Okay, so I would say, Terry Clark would say no. That's false consciousness. But in a sense, it shows how it wasn't Postone that invented that. That is, many people are using this in speeches and in ideology and so forth to say what is a class. But I would say it's more useful to make amenities and classes have clear definitions which are consistent the way that they've been used for a couple of hundred years, instead of redefining too much the older meanings. Okay, I'm talking a fair amount, but let me stop for elaboration of anything that I've said, questions, criticism, any other totally different topics.
Since this is the last class, so maybe I can introduce a little bit some other policy in China.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I prepared the policy education.
Okay.
Yeah, this year's China, the double reduction continued. That's in the field of education. Refers to the need to effectively reduce the excessive burden of homework and off-campus training for students in the compulsory education stage, from the primary school to junior middle school. Yeah, and so I wonder if you heard that policy.
I know very little about it, so please tell us. And
Okay.
How can we connect to the themes in the course? Yes.
Okay. Yes, the double reduction. This is two kinds of reduction. One is the burden of homework, and another is off-campus training. So this is a double reduction. And why the government?
So sorry, but what is the policy that these are being outlawed, that you may not do that?
No, began from 2021.
But
Two
I'm
years ago.
asking a simple question. What is the policy? We will not have no homework or less homework?
Less
homework.
homework. Reduction. Reduction
Okay.
means
Okay.
less homework.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the extra school means abolishing, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so they have, that is, there were many, just tell the others. In China, all over Asia, you have large numbers of very active, very expensive, very important training to get into. I should ask you. I want you finish my sentence.
Yeah, like for myself, I trained from my primary school until the senior middle school. So I have to train on every weekend.
Okay.
That's a huge amount of cost for parents.
Yeah. And so you went to another school, not to the normal public school, but
And that's a
Training.
very important industry in China for
Yes.
college graduates. they need work, and basically the central parliament, the central party just removed the industry overnight. You know?
Okay, so very important. So this huge industry has been abolished.
Yeah, overnight.
This was what, only 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
2 years ago.
Okay.
The fundamental purpose of this double decrease approach is to force school to realize the quality and the balance, improve the quality of the classroom teaching and learning. That's the fundamental purpose. And also the reform, examination and evaluation bring about a historical change in the teaching and the learning of basic education and promote the all-round and healthy growth of students. That's the aim. That's why
Okay.
the government.
But can either of you two explain a little more, what does that really mean? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, that is, or what, that is, should it, for instance, does it mean less memory, less memorization, more individual personality development, more social skills, more leisure? What might be changed?
Because maybe before the policy, the school will give students a lot of homework after school. As a primary school, maybe the students are doing their homework very late, maybe at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Then the policy will reduce the homework, so
Okay,
less
now-
homework.
Now that is clear. What is unclear is what should happen inside the classroom. What should change? What should teachers do differently? I don't hear that.
Yeah, evaluation changed. Like some primary school, the low grade, like the first year, second year, third year, they don't have the grades. They don't give the grades.
Okay,
like
so
the bus.
no grades. Okay, no, all right, that's
Yeah, that's that.
now I hear it's clear policy. No grades for the first few. Okay.
But the policy, is big. Then
Okay.
the every school
Sure.
will reform
Sure.
differently. Yeah,
Sure.
differently. I said the government policy is a huge, it's a principle, like a principle, like that. Yeah. And this begins in 2 years ago, also the Minister of Education promulgated the sleeper order, because like the junior middle school students sleep very late, so it has the sleep order. That is to say they have to sleep maybe more than 8 hours or more than what like this order. So after this policy, it is said that 60% of primary and secondary school students' sleeper duration increased to different degree, with 9.41% increase their sleep time by more than 2 hours. 21% increase in sleep time by 1 to 2 hours, and 28% increasing their sleep time by 0 to 1 hour. That is to say the sleeper hour longer. I think it's true, especially for primary school students. I saw them, they have less homework, and they can play after school. Yeah, maybe before I can see some primary students playing on the ground after school, but now I can see a lot of them playing after school. Yes. And another thing that he mentioned is the reduction of the off-campus training company. Yeah, actually, are a lot of training company, bankrupt. Yeah, and some of our bigger company transit to another business. Yeah, that's true. The original 124,000 offline off-campus training institutes were reduced to 9,728. This is a huge reduction, with a reduction rate of 92%. The original 263 online off-campus training institutions were reduced to 34, with a reduction rate of 87%. It's a huge number. And the compilation of the rate of the conversion of business to non-business and the preparation for change of auditing rate reached 100%. Yeah. So there's a lot of numbers say that it has a very good effect. Now in China, I introduced this double reduction.
Okay, well, these are controversial in China, they're controversial in the US, they're controversial in France, and so that the Denmark has gone the furthest, as we mentioned briefly. They have no homework in Denmark, and the surveys show that Danish students love to go to school, more, which is unusual for much of the world. Anyway, lots of things being discussed. Any other themes or follow-ups on? In a sense, okay, I won't answer, but anyone else want to follow up on that? Yes.
Maybe just adding some points to that.
Go ahead.
It's very interesting, the new phenomenon, because the official outside of school training was abolished, and there's a huge gray market growth and for outside school training. So and there's another parallel policy for officially hired government leading school students, teachers. These are officially hired teachers. They are not permitted to give class outside of school. But there's a huge need for parents and the students in China right now to have such training. The need is still there. So they kind of make some transactions in the gray market of training. So those officially hired teachers are still trying to teach outside of the school for those students who have need. And the parents trying to guard them. They find a new place which is very hidden, and they cannot be detected by the city department. And once some people trying to search their presence, they just chat on some like WeChat application and immediately turn their maybe training in some subjects into training to other subjects which are permitted, like arts, like sports. So it's very hilarious. Although the whole industry has been removed, there is a very strong, very big gray market in China right now.
Maybe it's a new driver for the arts in China.
Yeah.
I mean that's what happened, and that's the. I mentioned briefly, and I have a whole section on Habermas, the next generation after Adorno and Horkheimer is the leader of the Frankfurt School. And Habermas stressed the degree to which, where and why we have more arts, and I think I mentioned it. Didn't I mention that last time? Maybe not. Did I? Okay. What's the difference between England and Paris, or between England and the continent? that Habermas analyzed. Between the English coffee houses and the French cafes. The quick answer was that in the English coffee houses, people did talk about money, jobs, politics, many things, lifestyle. Whereas in France, it was basically that is, you had through the 19th century, especially, but you have aspects of this later on. There was censorship and control, and the government generally said you cannot create non-profit civic activities at all, and you cannot publish books or say things unless they're reviewed and accepted by a censorship committee. And so many books would then be captured or censored, and so Karl Marx, who was first in Germany, then he went to France, but he wrote, of course, his capital in the British Museum in London because of that. So Habermas's generalization was, if where we had this government control led to the lack of a stock market, led to a focus in the public, so that if the French don't like capitalism, maybe it's because they don't get talked about it in cafes, or those who do are following, say, Jean-Paul Sartre, who look at the pictures and those are businessmen and they're bad, and that it is nauseous. Okay, my corollary, or our corollary in the scenes point, is political control and censorship have the consequence in which we may have more generally, as you're illustrating very powerfully, independently. You didn't hear me say this yesterday or whatever. You're giving us a reason that where we can have a more active use of the arts in China, or let's say it's an interesting generalization as to where and how there may be more. I don't know. For instance, what did the Danes do with Denmark? Having no homework, do they do more of the arts, or where and how, what kind of arts, how does it, or sports, for instance, et cetera. So where do these other things? So for instance, you're taking a course with Stephen Raudenbush, who's a very distinguished expert on education, and he's created the charter schools linked with the University of Chicago, and he basically is against having arts or these leisure activities included in the schools. He wants to focus on math, history, quote, traditional topics. So I have a debate in that sense with him. But I will end it for now, as we are at the end of the hour, end of the course. But thank you very much, folks, for participating, and we appreciate your being here, especially those of you on the campus.